In the quiet town of Black Hollow, Pennsylvania, between 1892 and 1913, 89 children fell into a sleep they never woke from. Each was kissed goodnight by the same woman, a woman whose name was scrubbed from town records, whose face was torn from family portraits. The children didn't die, they simply stopped. No pulse, no breath, yet their bodies never decayed. When the town doctor cut one open, he found no organs, just hollow skin filled with rose petals. This story isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to follow the trail of missing children, a trail that leads to a forbidden ritual, a cursed lineage, and a secret still whispered in Black Hollow's empty nurseries. Let us know in the comments, what state are you listening from? Because tonight, we reveal what really happened to the 89 children kissed into dreams forever. The first child never made a sound. No scream, no whimper, just silence. On the morning of September 3rd, 1892, Mary Ann Whitaker opened the door to her son's bedroom and found him lying there, eyes wide open, lips slightly parted, as if frozen mid-laugh. His skin was cold. His chest did not rise, and yet, when she pressed her ear to his mouth, she swore she heard something, not breath, but a whisper, like wind through dry leaves. The doctor arrived, checked for a pulse, and shook his head. Dead. But then, the boy's fingers twitched. By the end of that week, 3 more children in Black Hollow had fallen into the same impossible sleep. No fever, no illness, just sudden stillness. The town's physician, Dr. Edwin Voss, recorded their conditions in his journal with a trembling hand, pupils dilated, no respiration, no heartbeat. Yet, they do not decay. Their skin remains soft. Their lips are stained pink, as if kissed by something that left behind a trace of roses. Then came the first confession. A little girl, barely 6 years old, woke screaming in the middle of the night. When her parents rushed in, she was clawing at her own mouth, sobbing. "Miss Lillian kissed me," she gasped. "She told me I'd dream forever." By dawn, she was like the others, motionless, unblinking, a living statue with a smile too peaceful for the terror in her last words. Black Hollow was a quiet town, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children played in the streets until the church bell rang for supper. But after that September, everything changed. Parents barred their windows. They kept their children close. And yet, one by one, the sleep took them. Always at night. Always after a hushed lullaby was heard through an open window. Always with the faint scent of roses clinging to their pillows. By 1913, there were 89. 89 children who never woke up. 89 small bodies laid in a special wing of the Black Hollow Cemetery, where the earth never seemed to settle over their graves. Some said you could still hear them singing on foggy mornings, faint childish voices humming a tune no one recognized. And then there was Miss Lillian, the woman who had kissed them all goodnight, the woman whose face, in every surviving photograph, had been carefully scratched away. Black Hollow was never meant to be a town. It began as a refuge, a hidden settlement carved into the Pennsylvania wilderness in 1689 by a group fleeing persecution, or so the official records claimed. The truth was far darker. The founders were not pilgrims seeking religious freedom. They were exiles cast out of a nameless European village for reasons no one dared write down. The only clue was a single line in a surviving letter from a Dutch trader who passed through the area in 1690. 1. They keep their children indoors after sundown, and whisper of a woman who walks the woods gathering dreams. The first permanent structure built in Black Hollow wasn't a church or a town hall. It was a squat, windowless building of blackened timber, its foundation stones etched with strange symbols, twining vines, crescent moons, and roses with too many petals. Locals called it the Quiet House, though no one could remember why. Children were forbidden from playing near it. Animals avoided it. Even birds refused to nest in its eaves. For generations, the town thrived in eerie isolation. The soil was unnaturally fertile, yielding crops that never failed, even in drought. Winters were mild, as if something in the earth itself radiated warmth. But there were rules, unspoken but understood. No one enters the woods after dark. No child sleeps without a sprig of rosemary under their pillow. If you hear a woman singing at night, lock your doors and cover your mirrors. The Blackwood family, who owned most of the land, enforced these customs with quiet menace. They were the town's benefactors, its shadow rulers. Their wealth came from nowhere, their influence unshakable. When asked about their history, they smiled and changed the subject. When pressed, people disappeared. Then in 1784, a traveling preacher named Reverend Elias Shaw arrived in Black Hollow. He lasted 3 days before fleeing, leaving behind a journal that wouldn't be found for another century. In it he wrote, "They worship something in the dark, not God, not the devil, something older. The women weave roses into their hair and speak of the mother's kiss. The men drink tea that smells of grave dirt. Last night I saw a child led into the woods by a woman in white. When I tried to follow, the trees shifted, blocked my path. This morning the child was back in its bed. It did not wake up." By the early 1800s, Black Hollow had become a proper town. On the surface, it had a schoolhouse, a general store, even a newspaper. But the old ways lingered. Every few years a child would vanish, only to reappear days later, hollow-eyed and listless. The town doctor would declare it a fever, a seizure, a tragic but natural affliction. The family would receive a generous stipend from the Blackwoods, and life would go on. Then, in 1868, the Black Hollow Orphanage opened its doors. It was a grand, 3-story building of red brick, funded entirely by the Blackwoods. The townsfolk cheered its construction, calling it a blessing for the poor and parentless. No one questioned why the architect had included a basement with walls lined in lead. No one remarked on the odd carvings above each bedroom door, a rose, a closed eye, a pair of lips. And no one noticed that the matron hired to run the orphanage, a woman named Lillian Graves, had no past, no family, no records of her existence before that day. But the children noticed. They were the first to whisper about Miss Lillian's habits, how she never ate in front of them, how her shadow didn't quite match her movements, how she hummed a lullaby in a language that sounded like no tongue spoken on earth. And they were the first to learn the truth about the goodnight kisses. The children called her Miss Lillian, but that wasn't her real name. No one knew what her real name was. She arrived in Black Hollow on a moonless night in the autumn of 1868, stepping down from a black carriage with no driver, no horses, just the creak of wheels that shouldn't have been moving. The townsfolk who saw her that first night swore she didn't walk so much as glide, her white dress untouched by the mud of the road, her face hidden beneath a veil of lace. She was hired the very next day to run the newly built Black Hollow Orphanage. No interview, no questions. The contract, signed in ink the color of dried blood, bore only a single unusual clause: the matron shall have final say over all matters pertaining to the children's bedtime. Miss Lillian never aged. Parents dropping off their children in 1870 would return years later to find her unchanged. Same porcelain skin, same 2 black eyes, same voice like wind through dead leaves. She wore white gloves at all times, even in summer. The orphans whispered that if you looked closely, you could see something moving beneath the fabric, like worms under soil. Her habits were small, unsettling things. She never ate, but the kitchen staff would find bowls of rose petals missing every morning. She could be heard humming in the halls long after midnight, though her door never opened. The mirrors in her quarters were all covered with black cloth. The children feared her, not with the bright, loud fear of a schoolyard bully, but with the quiet, creeping dread of something wrong. They told stories of how she'd lean over their beds at night, her breath smelling faintly of turned earth, and whisper, "Shh, little one, the mother is hungry tonight." In 1889, a new housemaid named Agnes Pike worked up the courage to peek into Miss Lillian's private rooms. What she found there sent her fleeing into the night, babbling about the faces in the walls. She was found 3 days later in the woods, her mouth stuffed with rose stems, her eyelids sewn shut with black thread. The coroner ruled it suicide, but the orphans knew. They'd seen Miss Lillian that night, standing over Agnes's body in the rain, her gloves finally off, her fingers long, bone-white, and ending not in nails but in thorns. By 1890 the disappearances began, not all at once, not enough to cause alarm. Just a child here, a child there, vanishing from their beds after Miss Lillian's evening rounds. The town council, half of them Blackwood cousins, dismissed it as runaways. The parents who asked too many questions received visits from men in black coats, after which they never spoke of their missing children again. Then came the winter of 1892, when little Thomas Whitaker became the first to stay. Not dead, not alive, just sleeping. And on his lips, clear as paint, the imprint of a kiss in rose red. Miss Lillian was seen that night standing at the orphanage window, watching the commotion at the Whitaker house. For the first time in memory, she was smiling. The next morning, every rose bush in Black Hollow bloomed out of season, and the children began counting the days until their turn would come. Thomas Whitaker was a sickly child, pale as parchment, with a cough that rattled his bones. He had spent most of his 7 years tucked into bed while other children played outside. His mother, desperate for a cure, brought him to the Black Hollow orphanage on the evening of September 2nd, 1892, not to abandon him, but because Miss Lillian had a reputation for healing frail children. "Bring him to me at moonrise," Miss Lillian had said, her gloved hands folded neatly over her apron. "The mother favors the fragile ones." No one witnessed what happened in that third-floor bedroom. Thomas's mother waited downstairs, clutching a handkerchief damp with lavender oil, when she heard it, a sound like 100 rustling pages, followed by a child's delighted giggle. Then silence. When Miss Lillian emerged, she was wiping her mouth with the back of her glove. A single drop of something dark stained the white fabric. "He sleeps now," she murmured. "He will sleep very deeply." Thomas's mother rushed upstairs to find her son lying perfectly still, his chest motionless, his skin cool to the touch, but his lips were parted in a smile, and his cheeks glowed with unnatural color, as if lit from within. When she pressed her ear to his chest, she didn't hear a heartbeat. She heard whispering, dozens of voices murmuring just beneath his skin. The doctor was summoned. Dr. Voss, a pragmatic man who had delivered half the babies in Black Hollow, took one look at Thomas and recoiled. The boy's veins were visible beneath his skin, not blue but green, branching like vines across his arms. His breath, when the doctor held a mirror to it, fogged the glass with a scent like crushed rose petals. "This isn't sleep," Dr. Voss wrote in his notes that night, the ink blotted with shaking hands. "This is something wearing sleep like a mask." By morning, word spread through Black Hollow. A miracle, some called it. Thomas Whitaker, who had never known a day without pain, now rested peacefully, forever free of suffering. Parents of other sickly children began lining up at the orphanage gate, begging Miss Lillian to bless their sons and daughters with the same kiss. She never refused. One by one, they came to her, children with fevers, with wasting diseases, with crooked spines. One by one, she led them to the third-floor bedroom, where the air always smelled faintly of damp earth. One by one, they emerged changed, not healed, harvested. By the end of that September, 7 children slept the endless sleep. Their families kept them in their beds, brushing their hair, changing their clothes, convinced they would wake any day. But the children only grew more beautiful in their stillness, their skin taking on the sheen of polished marble, their eyelashes glistening with something that wasn't quite frost. And on the last night of the month, when the moon swelled fat and white overhead, Miss Lillian stood at her window and sang a lullaby in a language no one recognized, a song that made the roses outside bloom black. The next child would not be sick. The next child would be taken simply because it was her turn. By Halloween of 1892, Black Hollow had stopped pretending the sleeping children were miracles. The signs were too precise, too patterned to ignore. It was always the same. A child would wake in the night to the sound of humming outside their window. The next morning, they would be found motionless in bed, lips stained faintly pink, their bodies perfectly preserved yet devoid of breath or pulse. No lock could keep her out. No parent's vigil lasted long enough. Some families swore their doors never opened, yet when dawn came, another child would be lying there, smiling, their small hands folded over roses that hadn't grown in Black Hollow for decades. The victims shared eerie commonalities. The time, always between midnight and 3:17 a.m., the witching hour when Black Hollow's church clock would inexplicably stop. The mark, a faint rose-shaped bruise just below the left ear, where lips might brush against a child's skin. The last words, nearly all children uttered the same phrase before falling into their eternal sleep. "She says I'll dream forever." Dr. Voss began documenting the cases in a ledger he kept hidden beneath his floorboards. His entries grew increasingly frantic. 8 October 12th, 1892. Subject 14th, Lucy Farnham, age 5. External examination shows no rigor mortis despite 48 hours of sleep. Internal temperature 57°F. Pupils react to light though subject does not. Most disturbing, when subject's mouth was opened, the tongue was missing. In its place, a single fresh rose petal. And by winter, parents took desperate measures. Some slept with axes under their beds. Others smeared their door frames with salt or hung crosses made of rowan wood. The Blackwoods, meanwhile, hosted lavish parties at their manor, where wine flowed like water and guests were discouraged from asking why no children were ever present. Then came the first attempted exhumation. In December 1892, a grieving father named Eli Carter dug up his daughter's casket just one day after her burial. What he found sent him running to the sheriff, babbling about wrongness. The coffin was filled with tangled rose vines still growing. His daughter's body was gone. At the head of the casket, pressed into the wood, was the clear imprint of lips. The sheriff, a Blackwood by marriage, had Eli committed to an asylum in the next county. But the damage was done. Whispers spread. The town split into factions, those who believed Miss Lillian was a saint preserving children from suffering, and those who knew she was something far older, far hungrier. By 1895, the count reached 47. The orphanage became a shrine of sorts. Parents would lay offerings at its steps, honey cakes, knitted shawls, locks of their own hair, hoping to appease whatever dwelled inside. Miss Lillian was rarely seen now, but her presence lingered in the scent of roses that clung to the sleeping children's pillows, in the way the orphanage's windows sometimes reflected faces that weren't there. Then, in 1901, the first sleeper moved. Little Henry Ainsworth, asleep for 9 years, suddenly sat up in bed and spoke a single sentence. The mother is almost full. His eyes, once blue, had turned the deep burgundy of old roses. By morning he was gone, his bed empty save for a scattering of thorns. The final victim in 1913 was not an orphan or a sickly child. She was the sheriff's daughter. When they found her, roses spilling from her mouth, her fingernails grown into delicate thorns, even the Blackwoods couldn't suppress the uprising. But by then it was too late. Miss Lillian had already stepped into her carriage, and the roses in the cemetery had begun to bloom black. Dr. Edwin Voss had delivered nearly every child in Black Hollow born after 1875. He knew the weight of a newborn's first cry, the rhythm of a healthy heartbeat, the way fever could twist through a child's body like wildfire. But nothing in his medical training prepared him for Thomas Whitaker. The moment he lifted the boy's cold wrist to check for a pulse, he felt it, a wrongness beneath the skin. Not the slack stillness of death, but something taut, coiled, as if the child's veins had been replaced with slender roots. When he pressed his stethoscope to Thomas's chest, he didn't hear silence. He heard rustling, like leaves stirred by a wind that didn't exist in the room. That night, Voss pored over his medical texts by lamplight, searching for any recorded condition that could explain it. He found nothing, but in the margins of an old anatomy book, he discovered a note in handwriting that wasn't his, Somnus sanguis rosa, the sleep of the blood rose. The afflicted do not decay, for they are not dead. They are vessels, empty ones. The next morning he went to the orphanage. Miss Lillian received him in her parlor, pouring tea that smelled faintly of damp soil. Her gloves, he noticed, were spotless. No trace of the dark stain he'd seen the night before. "You're curious about my methods, doctor," she said before he could speak. Her voice was smooth as grave silk. "Some children are too fragile for this world. The mother gives them kinder dreams." Voss demanded to see the other sleeping children. To his shock, she obliged. The third-floor dormitory held 17 small beds, each occupied by a motionless child. They were all so alive in their stillness, cheeks flushed pink, lips slightly parted. One girl's fingers twitched as if plucking invisible harp strings. Another boy's eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes that were entirely black, pupil and iris swallowed by something that shimmered like insect wings. Then Voss saw the vines. They grew from the children's mouths, slender green tendrils no thicker than thread, creeping across their pillows and twining around the bedposts. When he reached to touch one, it recoiled with a hiss. "They're dreaming," Miss Lillian whispered behind him, "and dreams need roots to grow." That night, Voss performed the first unauthorized autopsy in Black Hollow's history. He chose Mary Ann Whitaker's younger sister, Lottie, who had succumbed to the sleep 3 weeks after Thomas. The moment his scalpel parted her flesh, the smell hit him, not rot, but the overwhelming perfume of roses in full bloom. Her veins were green and fibrous. Her organs were gone, replaced by tightly coiled petals that unfurled sluggishly in the open air. Worst of all was her heart, or what remained of it, a hollow chamber of thorns, still pulsing faintly around a single drop of black fluid that burned through his glove when it touched him. Voss documented everything in coded entries, hiding his notes between the pages of his family Bible. But he made one mistake. he told his wife. Eliza Voss was a practical woman, the daughter of a Philadelphia surgeon. She listened to her husband's ravings about green veins and thorn hearts, then did what no one in Black Hollow had dared. She went to the newspaper. The Black Hollow Gazette never printed the story, but the next morning Eliza was found in her kitchen, her mouth sewn shut with hair-thin briars. Her eyes were open, staring. Her hands clutched a single rose, its stem studded with teeth marks as if she'd tried to chew through it. Dr. Voss disappeared that same night. His medical bag was found on the orphanage steps, its contents strewn across the cobblestones, scalpels bent like wilted stems, vials of medicine shattered, their contents evaporated. The only intact item was his ledger, open to a final entry in shaky script. They're not sleeping. They're incubating. The roses are growing inside them, and when they bloom... The rest was illegible, the paper stained with something dark and sweet-smelling. The townsfolk assumed he'd fled, but the orphans knew better. They'd seen Miss Lillian in the cemetery that night, standing over a fresh patch of earth where no grave should be, and they'd heard the muffled screaming deep below the roses. The Blackwoods did not build their fortune. They inherited it, not from any earthly ancestor, but from something far older. The family's private journals, locked in a lead-lined vault beneath their manor, told the true story. The earliest entries, dated 1691, were written in a cramped, frantic hand. The mother came to us in the old country. She promised our line would never want, so long as we kept her fed. We did not understand the price. We did not know the hunger of a god. For 2 centuries, the Blackwoods had upheld their end of the bargain. Every generation bore at least one child with the gift, a Blackwood who could hear the mother's voice, who could walk in dreams and return unharmed. These chosen ones served as conduits, arranging the offerings that kept their family in power. Miss Lillian was the latest. Born Lillian Blackwood in 1832, she had been a sickly, silent child with eyes too large for her face. At age 7, she vanished for 3 nights during a snowstorm. When she returned, her hair had turned white, and she carried a single black rose that never wilted. From that night onward, she took her meals alone. Mirrors cracked when she passed them. Dogs howled at her shadow. By 1868, the family knew the orphanage was necessary. The mother's hunger was growing. Ailing children had sustained her for generations, but now she demanded more. Young souls untouched by illness, their dreams bright and unspoiled. The Blackwoods commissioned the building with specific instructions. The basement walls were lined with soil from the old country. Every bedroom door was carved with the mother's sigil, a rose with a human eye at its center. The east-facing windows were deliberately flawed, their warped glass casting no reflections. The family's ledgers detailed the transactions with chilling precision. April 3, 1875. Payment received for the Thompson boy. 12 acres of fertile land added to the north pasture. The mother was pleased. His dreams lasted 9 nights. In October 31st, 1888, the Henderson twins offered. In return, the railroad bypassed Jacob Blackwood's debts. Note, their synchronized screams caused 3 oil lamps to shatter during the ritual. But by 1892, even the Blackwoods began to fear their own matriarch. Miss Lillian no longer aged, but she'd changed. Her shadow had developed too many limbs. Her reflection, when glimpsed in uncovered glass, showed a woman made entirely of thorns. Most troubling of all, she'd stopped obeying the family's directives. "She takes children without asking now," wrote Elias Blackwood in 1895. "Not just the sick or the orphaned. Last night it was the mayor's niece. We cannot control her anymore. The mother is waking." The final entry, dated the night before the orphanage burned, was written in a shaking hand. "Lillian came to my chamber tonight. She stood at the foot of my bed and smiled with a mouth that isn't hers anymore. 'The vessel is almost full,' she said. Then she kissed my forehead. I cannot feel my legs. The roses are growing in my lungs. God help us all. We made her too strong." When the townsfolk finally stormed the orphanage in 1913, they found the Blackwood family already there. Not alive, not dead, waiting. They stood in perfect rows in the basement, their bodies fused together by vines that pulsed like veins. Their eyes were open, unblinking, their mouths stretched in identical smiles. At the center stood Miss Lillian, her white dress now the color of old blood, her arms outstretched as if to embrace the mob. The fire should have killed her, but as the flames consumed the building, witnesses swore they saw her walking through the inferno untouched, carrying something in her arms, a bundle of roses or perhaps a child. The next morning, every Blackwood in town was gone. Their houses stood empty, their beds were made, and on every pillow lay a single petal, still damp with something that looked like dew, but tasted like salt. The letter arrived at the Philadelphia Inquirer on November 3, 1922, postmarked from a town that shouldn't have existed. Eleanor Price, a sharp-nosed reporter with a penchant for debunking occult frauds, almost threw it away. The handwriting was too precise, the paper too smooth, like vellum made from something that had never been alive. But the opening line hooked her. There are 89 children sleeping in Black Hollow, Pennsylvania. None of them are dead. And the woman who put them that way is still singing. Eleanor arrived in Black Hollow on a sleet gray afternoon, her notebook tucked in her coat pocket next to her revolver. The town felt wrong before she even stepped off the train. The station master didn't meet her eyes. The hotel clerk assigned her room 307, then paled when she accepted the key. That's the one Miss Lillian preferred," he stammered. The room was ice cold despite the roaring fireplace. The wallpaper, once floral, now faded to ghosts of roses, peeled away in places, revealing older layers beneath. Patterns that looked disturbingly like veins. Her first interview was with Mrs. Ada Carter, the last living parent of a sleeper. The woman's parlor walls were papered with children's drawings, all roses, all rendered in the same unnatural shade of crimson. "They don't rot," Ada whispered, clutching a teacup that trembled in her hands. "My Susanna was taken in '98. Her hair still grows. I braid it every Sunday. Sometimes she sighs." Eleanor asked to see the child. Susanna lay in a glass-paned coffin in the Carter's root cellar, preserved like a saint. Her cheeks were flushed. Her fingernails had grown into delicate curls. And when Eleanor leaned close, she saw it, the faintest movement beneath the girl's eyelids, as if something slithered behind them. That night, Eleanor dreamed of a woman in white standing at the foot of her bed, humming a lullaby that made her teeth ache. She woke to find rose petals stuck to her sweat-damp skin, though no flowers had been in the room. The next morning, the town archivist, a gaunt man with a nervous tic, let her examine Black Hollow's records. The ledger for 1892 to 1913 was missing. The birth registry showed 89 entries crossed out in the same rust-colored ink. When she pressed him, he cracked. "They're not gone," he hissed, shoving a brittle newspaper clipping into her hands. "They're dreaming in the roots." The clipping from 1913 showed the orphanage fire, but Eleanor's blood turned to ice when she noticed the shadow in the upper window, a woman-shaped blur with too many arms cradling something that squirmed. Her last dispatch to the Inquirer was penned at 2:47 a.m. on November 7th. The ink blotted as if by shaking hands. "The children are vessels. The roses are her teeth." The Blackwoods weren't feeding a god. They were fattening a parasite. "I've found the entrance to the tunnels beneath the orphanage ruins. If you don't hear from me by dawn, burn this letter," and the rest was illegible. They found Eleanor's notebook 3 days later, fluttering against the orphanage gate like a trapped bird. The last page held a single sentence, written in a child's clumsy script. "Miss Lillian says you can visit me soon, Annie." And pressed beneath the words, a perfect rose petal, still warm. The oldest thing in Black Hollow wasn't the blackened timbers of the quiet house, or even the gnarled oak in the cemetery that predated the town. It lived beneath them. The Blackwood family journals called it the mother, but that was a kindness, a lie to make the horror palatable. The sketches in the margins told the truth, a tangle of thorned vines as wide as a river, pulsing with something dark and thick. At its center, barely visible through the briars, something that might have been a face, or 100 faces fused together, their features melting like wax. The first Blackwood to encounter it was Matthias Blackwood, a disgraced clergyman who fled England in 1688. His personal diary, hidden behind a loose stone in the family crypt, described the meeting. "The earth opened beneath me as I prayed for deliverance. It showed me a garden where the roses had teeth. At its heart, she waited, not woman nor beast, but the space between. She offered me a bargain written in root and rot. My lineage would flourish beyond imagining, if only we kept the dreaming mother fed. Bring me the fragile ones," she whispered, "the ones whose minds flower bright and brief. I will kiss them into forever." The rituals were always the same. On the night of a new moon, the chosen Blackwood would lead a child into the woods to a circle of standing stones no survey map ever recorded. There, they would anoint the child's forehead with oil pressed from black roses, roses that grew nowhere else in Pennsylvania. Then came the lullaby, sung in a language that made birds fall dead from the trees, sanguis rosae, somnia eterna. The child would smile as vines slithered from their ears, their nostrils, the corners of their eyes. By dawn, they would be gone. In their place, a single perfect rose would bloom, a rose the Blackwoods would press between the pages of their ledger, its petals holding the child's stolen dreams. But the mother was never satisfied. By 1800, the journals noted disturbing changes. The roses grown from the children's dreams began developing eyes, tiny humanoid things that wept thick sap. The Blackwood conduits reported nightmares of a vast hollow beneath the town, where the sleepers hung like fruit on a monstrous vine, their bodies dissolving into the roots. Worst of all was the hunger. "She demands more every year," wrote Jeremiah Blackwood in 1845. "The sickly ones no longer sustain her. Last night, the standing stones were wet when we arrived. Hungry. Sarah's little boy screamed when the vines took him, the first to ever resist. The mother does not like being denied." When Lillian Blackwood became the family's conduit in 1868, everything worsened. The girl who returned from her 3-night disappearance wasn't entirely human anymore. She could walk through mirrors. Her shadow moved seconds behind her. And when she sang the lullaby, the sleepers would twitch in their beds, their lips forming silent words. The Blackwoods should have seen the danger, but power blinds. By 1890, the ritual ceased being secret. Children vanished from locked rooms. The orphanage basement grew its own ecosystem of pulsating roots that twitched when touched. And the sleepers began changing. Dr. Voss's final notes described it best. One subject, 23rd Emily Dowd, age 6, exhibited epidermal metamorphosis today. Her skin has developed a bark-like texture. When pricked, she bleeds sap. When most alarming, she spoke. "The mother is dreaming of waking," she said. Then her mouth filled with thorns. The Blackwoods realized too late what they'd done. The mother wasn't just feeding, she was gestating. Each child's stolen dreams were knitting together a new body, a vessel made of nightmare and nectar, something that could walk in daylight. Lillian was her hands, her voice, her knife. But soon, she wouldn't need even that. The final journal entry, scrawled in Elias Blackwood's shaking hand the night the orphanage burned, held the awful truth. "We thought we were her priests. We were her midwives. The sleepers were never the meal. They were the womb. When the 89th dream takes root, she will wear their skins like a dress and step into our world. God help us, Lillian isn't preparing the offerings anymore. She's crowning the queen. In the ruins of Black Hollow today, if you stand very still at moonrise, you can hear it, a wet tearing sound from deep underground, like roots breaking free. And in the cemetery, where 89 small graves lie empty, the roses have started blooming a new color. Not red, not black, but the exact shade of a child's sleeping eyelids. The fire began at midnight on December 24th, 1913, a date chosen deliberately. Christmas Eve meant most families would be indoors, distracted by candlelight and carols. Few would notice the figures moving through the snow toward the Black Hollow orphanage. Their lanterns shuddered to slivers of light. Sheriff Gideon Hale led the mob, though led was too generous a word. The man was a puppet, his strings pulled by the few remaining Blackwoods who hadn't yet succumbed to the vines growing beneath their skin. His orders were simple: burn it all. No one spoke as they doused the building in kerosene. The orphanage seemed to breathe in the flickering light, its warped windows reflecting faces that weren't there. When the first torch touched the porch, the wood didn't crackle. It screamed, a high, thin sound that raised the hair on every neck. Then the windows exploded outward, not from heat, from movement. Thick, ropey vines lashed through the shattered glass, whipping like severed arteries. Something in the basement thrashed, shaking the entire structure. The mob stumbled back as the ground bulged beneath their feet, as if something enormous were trying to push its way up. That's when they saw her. Miss Lillian stood framed in the blazing doorway, her white dress now the color of old blood. Flames licked at her skirts but did not catch. In her arms she cradled a bundle of roses. No, not roses. A child. The sheriff's daughter, taken just that morning. The girl's eyes were open, black and glossy as insect shells. Too late, Lillian sang over the roar of the fire. The roots are awake. The sheriff raised his rifle. The bullet struck her square in the chest. She laughed as greenish sap oozed from the wound. Then she stepped backward into the inferno. The child clutched tight. By dawn, the orphanage was a smoldering shell. The townsfolk sifted through the ashes, praying to find bones, proof that the horror was over. They found nothing. No bodies, no vines, Just 89 small beds, untouched by the flames, their sheets neatly turned down as if waiting for occupants. The official report called it a tragic accident, a wayward Christmas candle, a spark in dry timber. The Blackwoods who hadn't vanished paid off the right people, burned the right documents. By spring, wild roses grew through the orphanage's ashes, roses that bloomed only at night, their petals edged with teeth. And in the town records, one line was added to the ledger in careful script, and December 24, 1913, final payment rendered. The account is settled, but no one remarked on the faint, child-sized handprint pressed into the margin, or how the ink still smelled faintly of roses. The highway sign welcoming visitors to Black Hollow still stands, though the paint has peeled away to reveal older letters beneath, letters that spell beware in a script no one recognizes. The town exists in uneasy quiet now. The remaining families keep their children indoors after dark. They avoid the old cemetery where 89 small headstones tilt like broken teeth, their inscriptions worn smooth by time and something else, fingertips perhaps, tracing the names again and again. But the legend never died. Every few years another outsider comes searching for the truth. They arrive with recorders and cameras, armed with skepticism and the certainty that every horror has a rational explanation. They leave, changed. In 1987, a paranormal investigator named Paul Grayson spent a night in the orphanage ruins. His journal, found abandoned in the ashes, contained one final entry, and in 3:17 a.m., the roses are singing. I can see them moving under my skin. She says if I'm very quiet, I can stay dreaming forever. The pages after that were filled with childish drawings of a woman in white. In 2014, a YouTube crew filming haunted Pennsylvania captured something that sent them fleeing back to Philadelphia. The footage, later deleted from their channel but preserved on dark web forums, shows their thermal camera picking up heat signatures in the empty cemetery. 89 small shapes kneeling around the largest grave. When the cameraman zooms in, every head turns in unison toward the lens. Then there are the dreams. Ask any Black Hollow resident, and they'll look away before answering. They've all had it. The same nightmare of standing in a vast, dark garden where the roses have human faces, where something vast and hungry stirs beneath their feet, where a woman in a blood-stained dress hums a lullaby just beyond the edge of hearing. The worst part? They always wake with the taste of roses on their tongue. The old Blackwood manor still stands at the edge of town, its windows boarded, its doors sealed with chains that rusted shut decades ago. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, neighbors swear they see lights moving inside. Not the flicker of candles, but the eerie, pulsing glow of something bioluminescent. And always, the next morning, fresh vines will have crept a little further up the porch steps. The town council officially denies it all, of course. They've paved over the orphanage site twice, only for the asphalt to crack within weeks as something pushes up from below. The Historical Society has redacted every mention of Miss Lillian from their records, though visitors sometimes find her face peering out from old photographs where no woman stood before. But the children know. They play a game called Don't Let Her Kiss You in the schoolyard, taking turns being the woman in white. The loser has to lie very still with their eyes closed while the others chant, Lillian, Lillian, roots run deep, count to 89, and never sleep. No one remembers who taught them the rhyme, and every year, on the night of the winter solstice, someone reports seeing her, a pale figure drifting through the mist near the cemetery, her arms full of black roses. The police always find nothing, just disturbed earth where the children's graves used to be, and the faint, sweet scent of roses on the wind, a scent that lingers for days, no matter how hard the wind blows. The fire should have ended it, the record should have erased her, but Black Hollow's darkest secrets refuse to stay buried. What became of the 89 children? Their graves lie empty, yet locals swear they sometimes hear singing from the woods. Childlike voices humming a tune that matches the orphanage's old music box. Ground-penetrating radar shows nothing beneath the cemetery, yet every spring the soil heaves as if something is turning over in its sleep. Who, or what, was Miss Lillian? The few unburned orphanage records list no employee by that name. The Blackwood family tree shows a Lillian born in 1832, but her portrait has been excised from the album, the edges of the paper still sticky with sap. Those who glimpsed her without gloves described fingers too long, nails too sharp. But was she the monster, or just another prisoner of the dreaming mother? Why roses? The connection goes deeper than decoration. Botanists who tested the black roses from the cemetery found their DNA didn't match any known species. Their pollen, when viewed under a microscope, showed structures eerily resembling human teeth. And why did Dr. Voss's note specify that the sleeper's veins turned green, the exact shade of the vines that overran the orphanage basement? Most chilling of all, was the ritual ever truly complete? The Blackwood journals claimed the mother needed 89 dreamers to awaken, but the orphanage burned after the 89th child was taken. Yet something still stirs beneath Black Hollow, something that makes the new church bells ring by themselves at 3:17 a.m., something that causes the town's few remaining mirrors to fog over with the imprint of lips. And one final question, whispered by parents as they check their children's beds each night: if the mother is still dreaming, what happens when she wakes? The letter arrived last Tuesday, postmarked from a town that doesn't exist. The paper smelled faintly of turned earth and rose oil, the handwriting achingly familiar, though its author died a century ago. You who have read this far, listen carefully. The mother is patient. The roots are deep. 89 slept, but the garden always hungers for more. Do not search for Black Hollow on maps. The town you'll find isn't the one that matters. The real Black Hollow moves, its borders shifting like vines seeking sunlight. You may already be closer than you think. Notice the signs: roses blooming out of season, your reflection blinking a second too late, the scent of funeral flowers in empty rooms. Most of all, beware the dreams, especially those where you hear a woman humming just beyond your door. Especially those where you wake with petals stuck to your pillow. She is coming for the curious. She prefers those who know her name. Burn this letter if you value your sleep, or keep it and join us in the garden where the dreamers sing forever beneath the roots. Yours in eternal slumber, Evos P.S. Can't you hear her? She's right behind. The rest is illegible. But if you listen very carefully tonight, just as the clock strikes 3:17, you might recognize the tune. This story isn't over. Black Hollow still breathes beneath the earth, waiting for the next curious soul to uncover its secrets. Did Miss Lillian truly perish in the fire, or does she still walk the shadows, humming her lullaby to new generations? Now it's your turn. Comment below with your theories. Was the mother a god, a parasite, or something worse? What really happened to Dr. Voss and Eleanor Price? Have you ever heard roses singing at night? Subscribe and hit the bell, because next week we're revealing never-before-seen orphanage blueprints showing the hidden tunnels beneath Black Hollow. You won't want to miss what we found there. Follow us into the darkness. More forbidden histories await. But remember, she watches those who dig too deep. Turn on all the lights before you sleep tonight. And if you wake to the scent of roses, don't open your eyes.